So in the middle of October, I traveled to Thunder Bay and I attended a retreat of the Political Confederacy of the Chiefs of Ontario. That was in Thunder Bay, October 15th and 16th, and it was basically the very first, lengthy meeting that the PC has had since the election of the new regional chief in June. And we talked about how we're going to proceed as a political confederacy and some of the committees, but there is a Chiefs Committee in place to look at restructuring Chiefs of Ontario, and we felt that most of that information should be dealt with by that Chiefs Committee, and then we can discuss it later. While we were in Thunder Bay, we were also invited to attend the first of the Massey lectures that were being posted by CBC. And the lecturer was Tanya Talaga, who is the author of Seven Fallen Feathers, about young people that have died in Thunder Bay. And her second book is All Our Relations, and it's about Indigenous youth and suicide. So it was a very good event, and I was glad to be there. And they did she did her final lecture on October 30th in Toronto, at the University of Toronto, and I wasn't able to be there, although they had invited me to. So Amos Key, who was there doing the opening in the language, also extended a welcoming on behalf of Six Nations, so I thank Amos for that. And on October 17th, when I returned, I was at the Native Canadian Centre to provide greetings on behalf of the community for the opening of the Imaginative Indigenous Film Festival. That's always a fine event that takes place every year. And later that evening, the Lieutenant Governor, in conjunction with the Rotary Clubs and Honoring Indigenous People, held a screening of the First Contact series that was on APTN, where 6 people were brought in who knew nothing about Indigenous people and in fact had negative opinions of us, and gave them the opportunity to spend time in communities and spend time with our people and to learn. And she wanted to show that to some of the business and corporate people, so that was a good event as well. On October 18th, GRADE had their job fair here. I understand it was a huge success. So that a lot of people there were a lot of job opportunities that they could explore. That evening, I attended the Grand River Council on Aging event that was held in Brantford. It was done by that council, and it was talking about how we can make our communities more effective for those as we age. And on the 19th, I was back in Toronto for the launch of Talk for Healing, which was organized by the Native Women's Association. This is a helpline that anyone can call if they feel the need to talk to somebody about problems they're having or whatever. That thing is there to help people get through some difficult times. And on the 21st of October, we had another successful annual Remembrance Day here at Six Nations. It was a tough day for some of us with the loss of Bob Johnson, Councillor Johnson, who was always instrumental and played a big role in this, and also John Bradley Jr., who we lost, who also always recited the act of remembrance. But we were able to pull through and honor those men, along with Gerald Hope, who we also lost. So it was a good event for us. And on the 22nd, I traveled to McMaster University to meet with the president, Patrick Dean, to talk about how more Indigenous athletes might be able to play sports and get on some of the teams at MAC, and also to recruit more Indigenous students. So it's a project we're going to continue to talk about. On the 23rd, we had visitors here from the David Suzuki Foundation who came to learn more about Six Nations. And on the 24th, I met with the Associate Deputy Minister of the Ministry of Health just to talk about health services in our community. Later that day, I met with Tom Rankin, who's with the Canada Border Services Agency. He wanted to talk about some of the issues we're having with people coming back into the country once they leave from the United States. So we let him know some of the issues and continued to work with him. And he has agreed to go on the radio and maybe have a phone-in show at some point. So that's something we'll follow up on. And Mr. Rankin is the overall director for the bridges at Sarnia and Detroit and Buffalo and Niagara Falls and Lewiston. So good contact that we need to keep in touch with. We also met with on October 25th with the federal and provincial governmental representatives related to cannabis, and we need to have ongoing discussions with them because we informed them that we're going to be doing our own regulations, and we want them to respect that. October 25th, there was also the Elders Thanksgiving dinner, and we thank the Elders Network for putting that on. On the 26th of October, Phil Montour and I spoke to a civics class at BCI, a bunch of students there. And later that day, I met with some of the Indigenous students from the University of Waterloo. I was recently appointed to the Board of Governors of the University of Waterloo, and the students wanted to meet with me to let me know some of their concerns before I attended my first board meeting, which was held in Waterloo on October 30th. And October 26th, I also attended a conference with the early childhood workers, or daycare workers, that was held in Brantford. And there were daycare workers from around southern Ontario, all the First Nations who come together and awards are presented. And congratulations to Shelley Elliott from the Bicentennial Daycare, who got the award for professional early childhood worker, and also to Stone Ridge workers who got the team player award. On Halloween Day, October 31st, we also had a meeting with the supervisor of the Brant Healthcare System and the chair of the board. We have a lot of concerns about some of the things that are going up there, and including the appointments on the board and how we were not involved in any of that. So we're working with them to try and work through some of those issues and to have a bigger presence in Brantford at the hospital system, and to make sure that our people are properly cared for. I also met with Wayne Parrish, who's the CEO of the Canada Summer Games. As you know, we're working to get lacrosse as one of the sports to be played at the Summer Games, and now we're just talking about whether it's going to be one Indigenous team or whether there will be teams from each province with Indigenous athletes. So that will continue as well. Doug Devlin from CN was also here in the community to meet with me. He just wanted to update us on the hub they're doing at Milton, and also to let us know that CN has taken over operation of the track that runs through Hagersville, and it is actually the edge of our reserve, the boundary of our reserve. So, well, if we have any concerns on that track, we have a contact now at CN. And on November 1st and 2nd, I provided opening remarks at the 7th Parliament of World's Religions in Toronto. There were about 6,000 people there, and I want to thank Bob Goulet and Diane Longboat who were on the committee and pushed for Indigenous involvement in this World Conference. Six Nations was well represented there. We had a mini grand entry and almost like a mini powwow with several of our champion dancers that took part in that grand opening, and I was asked to make opening remarks to the 6,000 delegates that were there during the opening ceremonies. I also took part in a panel on the second day about Indigenous women's leadership. And throughout the conference, which lasted until November 7th, there was a Lodge of Nations with several Indigenous speakers that were taking part. So it was a good venue for us to start educating people about our culture and our history. And on November 3rd, we had another successful Thank a Vet lunch at Assumption College. Thanks to the committee for organizing that, and thanks to them as well for honoring Bob Johnston, because Bob's wife Joy and his son Chris and his family were there to light the candle of honor to remember all those vets that we have lost. On November 5th, I had to travel to Ottawa to take part in a meeting with the Chief Financial Officer at Indigenous Services to talk about funding and funding formulas for the 5 large First Nations. And those 5 large First Nations are Six Nations, and Akwesasne, Tyendinaga, Oneida, and Wikwemikong, because a lot of the funding is done by formulas, and we don't always get our fair share on those formulas, so that's something we're fighting on together jointly. I got home in time that night to go to a play at the Sanderson Centre, and it was called Sisters in Solace Play, and it was done by the Brant Theatre Work Group. And shout-outs to Cheyenne Williams and Lois Porter, Barb Miller, Brett Miller, and others from Six Nations who were actors in that show. It was an interesting show, and it was about Remembrance Day and people that had gone off to fight in the wars and people that we had lost. On November 8th, I was in Toronto to meet the new Vice President of Hydro One, and to talk to him about continuing to have a good working relationship with Hydro. And November 9th, I took part in a Remembrance Day ceremony at St. John's College in Brantford. And also we have visitors from Six Nations, the Ontario Legislature interns who are visiting our community, and we always welcome them because they learn more about who we are as Six Nations and, again, about our history and our culture. And on November 9th in the evening will be the 4th annual Six Nations Firefighters Gala. It's a full house, it's sold out, and it's a good event, and we do that to raise funding for our firefighters so that they can have more funding for training and equipment.